Welcome, 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 everybody, to another Sunday of When Black Women Gather. My name is Helen Higginbotham, and I am here today to share with you an adventure in Cuba. We have Linda Carter, who's going to lead us in conversation. Actually, she's going to do all the work today. I'm just going to hang out in the background. Hey, Linda.
Hey, hi everyone.
She's like, hey. Okay. And then, oops, and we have two guests with us, father and daughter team, which I love. And today it's called Cuba In My Soul, and it's a conversation with Linda Carter. So on that, Charles, you wanted to make a quick announcement, and we'll go into that, and you guys can just take it from there.
I want to do a quick screen share. One of the reasons I became very interested in Cuba, not the only one, not an early one, but one of the ones. Hold on, let me just share this with you.
And while he's sharing, I could easily say I want to express my appreciation to Professor Affuant and Nicole Affuant for taking the time out and making themselves available for this session. Nicole, I have to tell you, I almost started crying again.
Okay, let's see.
The song, Linda, that is a beautiful song. Thank you guys for sharing.
Estamos cumpliendo un elemental deber internacionalista cuando ayudamos al pueblo de Angola.
Cuando estábamos en la celda de castigo, la única forma de saber que estábamos vivos era chiflando la Guantanamera.
2.400 cubanos murieron combatiendo en toda África.
Uno empezaba chiflando la Guantanamera. Donde la dejaba, continuaba el otro. Y donde la dejaba el otro, continuaba el otro. La Guantanamera era la única forma de comunicación entre nosotros para saber que estábamos.
Y así venían muchos niños del sur, faltándole piernas, brazos, se han mutilado por la explosión de las bombas y las granadas.
Fue la quiebra de la columna vertebral del régimen del apartheid.
The Cuban people hold a special place in the hearts of the people of Africa.
Y ese día Mandela le dirigió la palabra a la nación cubana. Quiero que sepan que sin la participación de Cuba, yo todavía estuviera en la cárcel.
Yo siempre pensé que regresaría. Estuvimos rato abrazados, muchos ratos.
Hemos cumplido nuestro sueño de que África fuera libre de colonialismo y de la apartheid.
Ellos murieron luchando por la dignidad y la libertad de todos los hombres. Para ellos, gloria eterna.
Okay, guys, you're really, I'm not an emotional, I'm a passionate person. And so this is like really moving for me. And Nicole, don't laugh, but here we go. Because we don't have a lot of time today, but we have enough time. So basically, we're going to start out with Professor Affuant, who is a graduate of Rutgers Law School, Newark. Somebody's got some noise on. Licensed attorney and now clinical professor initially of the Urban League Clinic and community and transactional lawyering office at Rutgers University Law School. And Nicole Affuant, my new daughter, is an educator and social historian. And they're going to discuss the recent trip, but they're also going to get some real foundation in history that a lot of Americans don't know. And if nothing else happens, I really wanted them to come so that people could hear something different. And hopefully there'll be an opportunity to go back before the election. So on that note, Professor Affuant, you want to just give us some more highlights about your background, how you became interested in Cuba, and why you became interested in leading trips to Cuba. And I know you and I talked about this, so we're on the same page. Go ahead.
So I've known Linda Carter. We were classmates together. And you'd think after, I don't know, these 2 or 3 years that we've known each other, because we visited at school, right? she'd be able to spell my damn name right, but you know, you can't be adopting my daughter if you can't spell my name right, London, but that's all right. I grew up in the Bronx, the Boogie Down, in James Monroe Projects, and my family had a strong Puerto Rican nationalist background. Grew up taught by the Black Civil Rights Movement, and was nurtured on that. Cuba was, and I think that short little video, I always think it's important to teach my students how when the South African apartheid army marched north into Angola, the only country that supported the Angolan fighters was Cuba. And it wasn't done with the permission of the Soviet Union. They didn't even know about it. The Cubans did this because they felt they had, especially from the West Africa, that was their heritage, that was their people. And they've struggled against colonialism themselves and in Africa for quite some time. That was in 1975. So I've always been an activist. That's how Linda and I got to know each other. And with Cuba under siege since right after their revolution in 1960, I thought it was important. I still think that it's important for us to educate ourselves and each other about what our country has been doing and continues to do to the nation of Cuba. I think I'll stop there for now, Linda.
Okay, so in terms of deciding that this will be a trip abroad, because you have to go through Rutgers administration and all that, I'm sure. And we're not even talking about those FBI, but anyway, just if you can give us a little about putting it together to go to Cuba, especially in light of the relationship between the United States and Cuba, and you wanting to take students abroad from the law school. If you could speak briefly to that, and then, you know, based on your experience, some highlights. And you gave us one really important that a lot of people don't realize. I don't think you and I take it for granted. It's just we probably paid a lot of attention to that because it was so critical in the history of just people of color around the world. So if you can do a little survey, well, first of all, talk about the process to get the course to run at Rutgers Law School and to get the students interested in going. Because I do want to add that some of the students who went, and Nicole, you can correct me, but some of the students who went when I went recently after 50 years of trying to go were students who had Cuban background. So I thought that that was really interesting that they wanted to go for themselves. And I really, appreciate that. So if you want to speak to that, Professor Affuant.
So I'm at Rutgers Law School, and that's my alma mater and Linda's alma mater. And one of the reasons that we were attracted to Rutgers Law School was because this was a school that was, some people call it the People's Electric Law School. For us, a great attraction was the Minority Student Program. The Minority Student Program, or MSP as it's now called, was started by struggle, was born of struggle. And I speak to new admits in this program every year, and I remind them that even though they're smart, you have to be smart to get into law school, intelligence for us as people of color has never been enough. And the only reason that we were permitted into law school is because Black folks in Newark rebelled in 1967. People were killed during that rebellion. And as a result, the few Black students, together with some progressive other students in Rutgers Law School, just about closed the school down and demanded change. The school was in the midst of Newark, and it was lily white, practically all lily white. And the students demanded change, and they won that struggle. And as a result of that struggle, this program called the Minority Student Program was born. And it really changed the face of the legal community, the bar in New Jersey. Some people would argue with me and say no. In the United States, there have been thousands and upon thousands of Black and brown law graduates out of the city, out of the Newark MSP program. So we have this history of progressive struggle, and I decided that it would be a good thing if I could offer a course on the Cuban legal system. I have gotten only support from the faculty and administration in Newark. Any resistance I got would come from New Brunswick, and the Newark Law School administration was always supportive, as well as the Chancellor's office in Newark, Chancellor Cantor specifically, who is being forced out now. Got that support, and our first trip to Cuba was, this year was kind of historic, that not only because Linda finally came after telling me for years she wanted to come, but this year marked 20 years since our first trip. Our first trip with law students was in 2004, so 20 years ago. And we're still going strong. Next year, we're finally going to have an undergraduate contingent joining us. So we're really excited about that. And Nicole is going to be one of the leaders of that undergraduate contingents. I'm happy it's not me, because undergraduate students may be too much for this old man.
So
You're muted.
No, I'm off now. So Professor Affuant, before we get to Nicole, if you could, just a brief account of the relationship and dynamics between the Cubans in the US and Cubans in Cuba since the revolution. Oh, wait a minute, I forgot. And a little, I guess before that, a little survey on the history of Cuba, like a little survey.
Wow. So Cuba has always been in the sights of the United States. As Thomas Jefferson talked about acquiring Cuba as a colony, because the young United States realized, looking at its European roots, that that's how you gain power in this world, by having colonies. So Cuba was always in the US sights. And but the Cubans, as a people, as all people, are fiercely independent. They had several wars against Spain, their colonizer, for independence. What we call the Spanish-American War, the War of 1898, the Cubans call the second significant war for Cuban independence. They did not want to be under the wing of the United States. The song Guantanamera, which we just heard, was a poem written by I think he's called the Prince or the Angel of Cuba, Jose Marti. He was a poet, and he traveled. He spent a lot of time in New York and Florida raising money, buying armaments to carry out the Second Revolution. As the revolution went on, the United States started to rattle its sabers. The Cubans tried to resist the Americans coming in. Spain was practically defeated. It was a weakening empire. It had a war going on in the Philippines, another war for independence by the Filipino people, which we don't hear about. Puerto Rico was revolting, all its colonies, and Cuba. Late in that war, the United States joined in. They had to promise the Cubans they wouldn't seek to colonize Cuba. They even went so far as passing a joint resolution in Congress saying they had no intention to colonize. And then at the end of the war, they quickly colonized Cuba and stayed there for quite some time. They only changed when they forced Cuba to adopt 10 restrictions in their constitution, which basically gave the United States a right to intervene in Cuba's economy and Cuba's politics whenever it wanted, and they did so a couple of times. Finally, in 1940, they got out from under that. They passed a progressive constitution. And there was a young lawyer who was running for Congress, but then Fulgencio Batista made a coup, and that young lawyer, Fidel Castro, changed from an erstwhile politician to someone who was fighting against the dictatorship of Batista. Batista was a Cuban, a dark-skinned Cuban, a black Cuban, who, even as president of Cuba, was prohibited from entry into some places because of his skin color. So this was the reality of Cuba. It was controlled by mobsters who control the casinos and the resorts, while poorer Cubans were mostly illiterate and lived lives of desperation. And that's why the Cuban Revolution, led by Fidel, was successful. Right after the revolution, in 1960, the United States imposed an embargo. We stopped buying sugar. We were a major purchaser of sugar from Cuba. We stopped buying that, and we imposed ever-increasing restrictions on Cuba, which has and I have this statement. It was a paper by a gentleman named Malloy, who was a State Department official, who noted that this embargo, the aim of the embargo, was to make life so desperate. Let me quote. Every possible means, and I'm quoting, every possible means should be undertaken promptly to weaken the economic life of Cuba. If such a policy is adopted, and they're talking about the embargo, it should be the result of a positive decision which would call forth a line of action which, while as adroit and inconspicuous as possible, makes the greatest inroads in denying money and supplies to Cuba, to decrease monetary and real wages, to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of the government. And that was the stated policy of our country, the United States, in enforcing this embargo, which is still going on, which only became somewhat more lax when Obama was the president. And that's because he was limited in what he could do because under Bill Clinton, the embargo changed from a policy imposed by the president to a law imposed by Congress. Trump, when he came in, made things much, much worse as far as the embargo. And people are suffering in Cuba. When I look at Gaza today, and we talk and we hear about how Israel is using starvation as a weapon, we're doing the same thing to Cuba. We're not dropping bombs openly as they are in Gaza, but we're using starvation as a weapon in Cuba through the embargo. I would think, and it's always amazing to me, I would think that the Cuban people would be so angry at Americans, but they're not. They really understand the difference between the American people and our government, and they welcome us every time I've been there warmly with open arms. They humble me.
Yeah, they do. So now we're going to hear from Nicole, the really brilliant one. But go ahead, Nicole, tell us a little bit about you, how you became, aside from the fact this is your dad, but how you became involved in the effort to the degree that you are. And just give us some highlights on, from your perspective in terms of culture, economy, politics, etc. So.
Yeah, thank you, Linda, and thank you for having us. This is, really, I think, timely topic as we think about how we're connected around the world. So just a little bit about me. I have a PhD in an interdisciplinary program called Urban Systems. And urban systems is a global analysis that looks at different systems, right, around the world, but particularly focusing on the US because of US power and influence around the world. And how those systems impact folks in urban areas, particularly, when we think about the intersections of race, gender, and class. And my specialty areas are in the systems of educational policy, health, and the built environment. But my scholarship in particular really used a critical race feminist perspective, and critical race feminism grows out of both critical race theory and Black feminist thought to look at how race and gender intersect. And a lot of my work was looking at how schools in particular, but institutions in general, do create policies and practices that really limit Black and Latinas bodies, Black women and Latinas bodies. But I'm also a product of Newark, New Jersey, and although I was not born here, so my father says I can't say I'm a native, a Newark native. I grew up here, and I did my K through 12 education here in Newark. And one of the painful things that I think the city is experiencing still, unfortunately, is this divide between Black and Latinos within the city. And that was something that I witnessed. So as I was completing my graduate work, I got involved in anti-racist organizing and workshops. And the anti-racist organizing really focuses on racism in the US and how race and racism is constructed in the US. And so it provided me with an analysis of what was happening both in the city of Newark and in the country at large in terms of the division between Black and Latino folks. And I was able to learn about, right, the unity of Black and Latinos, particularly in the 60s and 70s. You know, in Newark, there were Black and Puerto Rican solidarity groups that did a lot of work together and opened a lot of doors for folks in the city. And this was true in New York City as well. But, you know, I remember I helped my father back then have a conference on Cuba at Rutgers Law School. And I recall asking one of the Cubans who was visiting something on race, right? Like, what about, you know, Black Cubans and how they're treated? And they were so resistant. And I remember thinking, like, you know, why don't they want to admit that there's, you know, inequity within the country? But what I learned was how I was coming from this very, you know, US perspective, and that in Cuba, they saw race very differently, or they approached race differently. And, you know, I think now there are more acknowledgements that there are differences in terms of equity within the country, but I think they're still different from the US perspective. I'll say more about this in a moment. So between that experience and my son's work, and my son was doing a lot of work across Latin America, I realized that the anti-racist narrative, limiting it to the US was problematic, and we had to incorporate a more global perspective of race and racism beyond the US. And that got me really interested in, you know, colonialism and what the role of colonialism or the role colonialism played in constructing race and racism. So, you know, the work that I do with the Cuba class is look at that, right? So how was race and race constructed in the US in the colonies? And we know that, well, for one thing, the concept of race and the concept of whiteness, right, was created here in the colonies. The first time we see white mentioned in a legal document is in 1681, which was a legal document within the colonies that it was like an anti-miscegenation law. And at the same time, when we think about Spanish colonialism throughout Latin America, we see similar policies and enactments coming up, right? And, you know, the focus of these policies and the focus of this construction of a racial hierarchy was really about putting white at the top, this creation of white at the top, and Black at the bottom, with other folks kind of mixed in between, right? Just fighting not to be at the bottom and fighting to get proximity to whiteness, because it was understood that there was power there with that white identity. You know, and we know that what counts as white or who counts as white changes over time. And this is true, again, both in the US or the colonies, and then, you know, when it becomes the US and throughout Latin America. So there are a lot of similarities there. It is in the Haitian, the enslaved people's revolution in Haiti in 1791, where the Spanish, you know, countries under Spanish colonialism throughout Latin America really start to see an increase in brutality. I mean, it was brutal already, right? To be an enslaved person or to be Black in the Spanish colonies was a brutal experience. But the brutality and the strictness increased even more so after the revolution in Haiti. At the same time, in the colonies in the US, in the States, you know, or before that, I would say in the colonies in the US and then the US, we also see stricter control. So in 1705, the acts concerning slaves, servants and slaves, right, what we call the slave codes, are you know, being put out. We see the eugenics really, you know, being pushed forth as a legitimate science, even though we know it is BS science. And things like even, after the formation of the United States, the 1790 Immigration and Naturalization Act, which said in order to be a citizen of the United States, you had to be a free white person living here for 2 years and be of good moral character. So defining who gets to be a citizen even. Denying citizenship to anyone who was kidnapped from Africa, who had African ancestry, as well as to the indigenous people here and the Asian folks who were brought here for low wage labor. In around the same time, 1795, in colonial Spanish America, we have policies or programs such as Gracias al Sacar, which means thanks for the exclusion. So this speaks to who gets to be white. So Gracias al Sacar was a program in which folks of mixed race ancestry, right? So if you were European and African, and many of us can name how folks became European and African, right? One of the things that is created as policy, even in the colonies, is that folks born to a mother would take the identity, the citizenship of the mother, which basically legalized sexual assault of enslaved women. So folks, though, in Spanish colonial America of mixed race could buy a white identity through this program, Gracias al Sacar. So we see in Spanish colonial America that there is also this hierarchical racial system that has white at the top. They have another group, mestizo, which is a European mixed with an indigenous person, as something like less than white. There is a racial group called pardo, which is a mix of African, European, and indigenous folks. Mulatto, which we know is which you may know is an offensive term because it's based on mixing a mule and a donkey. I think it's something like that. Very offensive terms, which spoke to a person who is of African and indigenous heritage. And then at the bottom, they had a racial group called negro, right, which is Spanish for black. So again, we see that this preference for white, so putting white at the top and black at the bottom. And that's why, I think regardless of how race is structured throughout Latin America versus here in the United States, it's very clear that this is about anti-Blackness, right? And what we have to fight against is anti-Blackness, both throughout Latin America and in the US. So I can say a lot more about race. There's also like the Blanqueamiento program from between 1817 and 1930, which incentivized white people from European nations to come to Spanish colonial countries throughout Latin America to whiten the race, believing that lightening the race would make these places more respectable. Or would decrease folks wanting to, revolt against against the colonial power. The other thing, I think that is really important when we think about race through Latin America is how much, and both in the US, right, how much these programs, these narratives are internalized by us, right, as human beings, and then passed down from one generation to the next. So when we think about like something like anti-Blackness in across Latin America, we want to be very clear that the anti-Blackness that we see in individuals today is a direct link from these colonial structures. So I think in addressing it and combating anti-Blackness across Latin America, it's really important that we make these clear connections to folks, right? That we're, spelling out how this was done to them. And that's how we undo it. We have to educate. The thing that's different in Cuba, I want to say, is that Cuba really, after the revolution, was very clear that they needed, or even during the revolution, that they needed to unify Cubans of African descent and Cubans of European descent and mixed race Cubans, right? And so after the revolution, they are very clear that they have a national identity, and that identity is that of Cubanidad, meaning we are one. Right. And they also are very clear in their education that they are all African, that they are all descendants of Africa. And they celebrate that very much. However, it doesn't mean that racism is not an issue there, or that inequity is not an issue there. So again, one of the things that is still a problem are those unconscious biases that are passed down, that we have internalized, you know, from colonialism about race, that are completely made up, right? And the other thing that we're seeing is, because after the revolution, many folks who have higher economic status fled the island. And we know that higher economic status was tied to whiteness, or Europe, you know, it was most likely Europeans, or people of European descent fled the island. They are, and they're now in Miami, in Union City, New Jersey. They are now able to send back remittances to the island, to their families. So what that's creating an economic divide between white folks, or, you know, lighter skinned folks in Cuba, and Black folks in Cuba who didn't have families in such large numbers leave the island, who are over here and able to send back remittances. So that's a real problem that they are experiencing in Cuba that needs to be addressed. So I said a lot. I took up a lot of time. I'm sorry. There's so much.
That was excellent. And I'm sure everybody appreciated it, because you filled in a lot of information, particularly about people from, I never say Latin America, I always say South America. It's just me. So yeah, you filled in. So I know that Nicole and Professor Affuant have to leave in about half hour at the latest, but I wanted to, I had a couple of things for it. Either one of you can take. One is about what the American public should know about Cuba, and you gave people a lot of things, but particularly with regard to the media's portrayal, and also what resources, if you can, I guess, Nicole, some resources that people can get that are neutral, because, you know, I love Cuba. I was gonna love Cuba no matter what, but and I have to add this while you guys are there, because you two know that what Cuba reminded me of. I grew up in public housing in Newark, in the Central Ward, and I grew up with people who were former, who had fled being sharecroppers, and some had fled the Ku Klux Klan. And so that whole feeling, and that's probably why I get so emotional about it, like, it took me back to living in Newark before the drugs came, in terms of we are one, that whole is we and not me, that whole concept. Even the mindset, even, you know, aside from what Nicole talked about in terms of potential dissensions here and there as a result of color and things, you still get the flavor from the conversations when you're talking to people. It's about we, right? It may be different degrees of we, but it's everybody, from the lawyers, because we had a chance to spend a lot of time with the lawyers, but everybody's we. And the fact that they had a new constitution, I can't even imagine trying to do a new constitution in the United States. You think our constitution has become geared to corporations? You haven't seen anything. If we were doing a new constitution, and the other part is about how in the United States, the lawyers, you know, when we think of poor people in legal services, we think it's an afterthought. But there, it was critical for the lawyers to go out and be with people and get the feelings and the information from the people. So that was like very powerful for me. So I just wanted to say that the whole trip was powerful to me from an environmental point. When I found out that Cuba just came out of the ocean, you know, it's kind of, I'm not a religious person, but it had a spiritual thing, like it came out of the ocean, and that there are things there that that don't exist anywhere else in the world. So it just, everything we saw. And when we went to, was the Revolutionary Museum. Okay. And then the power's going off, and I'm going to let them talk a little bit about that, but we're there, and I'm looking at a letter from the CIA in 1985, talking about the Cuban problem. And then the power goes off. that was like perfect timing for the power to go off, because it went back to the point that Professor Affuant said about we're gonna make them bow down no matter what and however long it takes. So on that note, I just wanted to get that in before they left. So Professor Affuant, Charlie, if you want to talk about the U.S. media's portrayal of Cuba, and something about the blockade and embargo, because people don't necessarily know that that's an act of war that we're engaged in. You did talk about President Obama and Trump, so that was really helpful, so people can see there was an effort, even though it may not have been for the people and for U.S. corporations to access 11 million people. The fact is, I think it gave the Cuban people a little respite, a breather for a hot second. That's my position. So, all right, on that note, either one of you can jump in on the media and what American public should know. Blockade, embargo.
So like everything else we experience, the American media puts out a line that is really suggests that Cuba is a prison island that is about to fall, and it's just not true. Cuba is certainly not a perfect place, and they are the first ones to tell us this, but they are struggling to try and implement the Cuban experiment, and that changes. Younger people, you know, there's been my mother always say, my mother always told me that no knife just cuts one way, right? To every action, there's an opposite reaction. Well, I was there in Cuba on Saturday, the Saturday before President Obama came. He came on Sunday. Cuba was abuzz. People were excited. Cubans were excited. They were in the streets. They were literally grabbing us in the streets, telling us how they were so excited about Obama, telling us how they love the American people. They thought that finally their struggles to exist would be over. Now, the embargo against Cuba is hard to understand unless you visit the island. But the world's commerce is done in dollars. And unless you can pay in dollars, your ability to engage in international trade is severely restricted. Cuba is prohibited from doing business in dollars, and they have to go through great machinations to engage in international trade. If any product contains 10% or more of Cuban made goods, so for instance, Cuba has a large deposit of nickel, and nickels are used in batteries now. Any product that has 10% or more of Cuban manufactured goods is prohibited from being sold in the United States. If a cargo ship, and these are all enforced by law, if a cargo ship goes to a Cuban port, it is prohibited from coming into a U.S. port for 6 months. Now, if you own a shipping company and you have to decide whether you could let your cargo ship go to Cuba and then be prohibited from having that ship dock in an American port for 6 months, there is a decision, a monetary decision you're going to make. Cuba was placed on the state sponsor of terrorism list. Now, it was taken off by President Obama. The CIA admitted that Cuba was not sponsoring terrorism, Trump put it back on. So if you're a European who wants to go on vacation, and many Europeans did go to Cuba for vacation, but if you're a European who wants to go to Cuba on vacation and you go to Cuba, you're not permitted to come to the United States for a certain period of time. So these are all restrictions placed on Cuba. Now the farmers in the United States have been clamoring because they want to sell to Cuba. They have goods. It's a market 90 miles away. They've forced Congress to allow them to sell goods to Cuba, certain goods, food, goods, produce, and some medicines. But anything sold to Cuba must be sold cash up front. And that's not how the world trade goes. The credit is not permitted. So there is very little trade between US and Cuba because it's all restricted. And again, the purpose is to make life so unbearable for the people that they'll overthrow the government. Trump just made things far worse. And for the first time in its history, just a few months ago, Cuba was forced to ask the United Nations for food assistance, and the United Nations sent several hundred tons of powdered milk. Things are desperate for the Cuban people, and it's important for all people of goodwill, whether you agree with their system of government or not. Starving people, I mean, it's just wrong to do that. So one of the things I want to do today is to urge all of you to raise your voice just to let Cuba live. And how do we do that? I think for us, it's much the same as we can do to end the genocide in Gaza. We can make a phone call to our congressman. We could write an email. We can talk to folks about it. We can learn more about what our country is doing and raise our voices, teach our friends. And I want to join Nicole in reminding you and reminding me to thank you so much for inviting me and her here today to talk about this. So that's what I want to urge you to do. I want you to urge your lawmakers, read a little bit more. But where can you read? Well, there's a lot of sources that I go to. There's a place called the People's Forum, which is a very left, but it's really unbiased news. There's Democracy Now! That has information. And look, there's the Cuban newspaper. There's a Cuban newspaper you could see online. It's called Granma, Granma. They have an English edition, and you can read that. And come and visit. Come with us to Cuba. It would be that's the best way to see and learn. And the Cuban people would love to have you there.
Yeah, and I think that some people asked that question for me to ask you. I think one of the questions was, how do they feel when they see Black people? You know, the colored ones, not the light-skinned ones, but the colored ones. I was not I didn't have anything. Nicole, you want to add anything?
Yeah. I think I want to speak to a couple of the questions that were there, particularly first, like about limitations. And I'm going to get to that question that you just brought up. But so, you know, I want to remind folks that it is illegal for us as U.S. citizens to travel as tourists to Cuba. This is a U.S. rule, not a Cuba rule, right? It is illegal for us to be tourists in Cuba. So if you want to travel to Cuba, you have to get there are particular reasons that allow you to travel, right? So you have to get a visa that speaks to that reason. And so we go either, as professionals doing professional research or for education purposes. That's how we bring students. You can also go as individuals. There's like a people-to-people visa. Housing limitations when you go. One of the things my father brought up, the restrictions that President Trump put in place, that Biden kept in place, is that you can't stay at particular hotels that were put on a list. And pretty much every single hotel was put on that list. So that really made it difficult for folks in the US to travel, even if you were going for a legitimate reason like professional research or educational purposes.
And that list is a US list. It's not a Cuba list.
Yes. Yes. So the way that we've gone the past couple of years is that there have been some new hotels built since that list was made. So they're not on the list yet. Banking, your credit cards, your debit cards from the US do not work there. You have to bring cash to do anything in Cuba. And once you are out of cash, you are out of money. There is no way to get money. Your cards will not work there. So of course, these are really huge restrictions, not just for us as researchers, but when we're thinking about bringing students there, thinking about, well, how much money do we even have to travel with? I spoke to the travel itself. So Black Americans, in my experience, I've found that it's Black Americans who are more excited to see Black folks in Cuba than vice versa. I think Cubans are excited to see Americans, which is surprising, right? They love Americans, they love us, and they're very clear that the policies of the United States are not from the people of the United States, right? They separate the two, and they love us. They love talking to us. They love getting to know us. They are such welcoming and warm people who don't have much, but will give you and share everything they have with you. But it's been my experience that Black Americans have been pleasantly surprised about the percentage of Black Cubans. And the way that the African ancestry is celebrated there. It's so clear in the art, in the music, in the dance. They're very clear where those roots come from. So that's my
Nicole, if I could just add, because I said this in the class, that for a long time we were told, and this was the advantage, I think, of the embargo to some, not that, the good part was that in many instances, Cuba retained its Africanness more than some African countries. So you can get a pure sense to some degree in different areas about Africa and the African, somebody said, spiritual roots and things of that sort. I mean, that in itself is a reason to go, just to get, so the embargo in terms of it kept people out. So you kept the pureness. So that was the one good thing about it. It maintained a certain pureness in terms of the African culture. And we had a chance on that Sunday, which is Sunday is really interesting, right? Because the gentleman talked about how with Santeria and Catholicism, and what he said was, I never heard it. He said the Santeria was a problem-solving cultural practice. I never heard anybody say that. I thought that was interesting. So they're going to have to leave in a little bit, if the latest 5:15, because they have guests coming. But if there's some quick questions that people may have, just really quick questions, if anybody has it. Helen, you see anything? Do you have anything? Oh, and while we're waiting, 99%, I'm sorry, in terms of their ability to read, 99% of the population. It's like amazing. We don't have that here. In the wealthiest country on the planet.
99% what? Are bilingual?
Literacy.
Oh, literacy. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the first things,
Go ahead.
one of the first things that happened after the revolution was that Fidel asked young people to volunteer to go throughout the country, especially in the countryside, to eradicate illiteracy. There's a small museum we visited in March that is dedicated in February. Yeah, February. I was close. That it's dedicated to tell the story of that campaign. And I did not know until I visited that museum that there were counter-revolutionaries, still some people that had escaped from the CIA led invasion that were in the hills that killed some of the workers that were teaching people how to read. I saw a picture that I really loved in the museum of a brigade of women marching. They didn't hold rifles, but they had large pencils. It was just amazing. So yeah, Cuba has really wiped out literacy. They are stunned when they hear the educational debt that many of my students have, because education in Cuba from kindergarten through graduate school, medical school, law school is free, completely free, as is medical care. So yeah, that's
and Charlie, also medical care, with all this going on, they still bring people from other countries for free to go to medical school. Like that is a we mentality, if ever.
Yeah, Cuba has a school, the School of the Americas, Medical School of the Americas, where people from all over the world are brought to learn medicine. Many Americans go there. I saw recently there are 50 Palestinian students that were admitted this year. I think it's one of the largest medical schools in the world. I visited there once. It's pretty amazing. One of the things that we do, though, talk about the embargo, and there are some anti-Cuba Cubans that really continue to try and strangle Cuba. The appropriations bill, which just passed, contained a requirement that any country that obtains medical teams from Cuba may be sanctioned by the United States. The continued attempts to strangle Cuba are just astounding. And these are the things we have to raise our voice against.
So I know you two have to leave. And if there's we can do maybe one quick question. I think Nicole's been responding to people in the chat. That saves some time. Anybody have a pressing?
I'm told to do that.
I just wanted a real summary. Most of the Cubans in, let's say, Miami, are they pro or against ending the embargo with Cuba?
When I came from the Bronx, and when I came to Newark, and I met Cubans in law school. And I went to Union City, literally written on the walls were todo contra a Fidel, everything against Fidel. So there was a Cuban from Union City that went to Cuba to get the release of people who were being held prisoner from the Bay of Pigs invasion. He had to move. They set his car on fire, and he just went there to get Cubans out of prison.
Wow.
But things have changed. Younger people, America does this, right? Younger people don't think they're going to go back, and they're here. Linda and I have friends that are Cubans that may not support the Cuban government, but they're lawyers, they're judges, and they're Americans. And they don't have as much of a hard line stance against Cuba. that their parents, certainly their grandparents did. So there are beginning to be some cracks in that, in what was really a unified community in exile. They're no longer a community in exile waiting to go back. But the folks that are funded by the wealthier Cubans are pretty much against the Cuban government.
I would just at the end, I know Helen has spoke briefly to Professor Affuant about maybe doing a trip when Black women chat. So in terms of the process, I think Nicole, you did speak to us to some degree. Anything you want to add in terms of if people want to try to do a trip? I know Helen talked about maybe doing something around Labor Day or Indigenous Peoples Day.
Yeah, so I mean, so one of the big times that people travel is actually coming up. May Day, somebody asked about that in the chat. May Day is a celebration of laborers, right? And the fights for labor rights and recognition. They do an international, celebration for that. So that's big, but in the fall, yeah. So because it's illegal to travel there as a tourist, one of the early questions was, what does a typical day look like? Well, in order to travel there, you have to have a full day of scheduled activities. So it's very exhausting. It is not a relaxing trip. So
Thought it was.
So from very early in the morning, you are either in lectures about different topics, because we went with law students. We were in lectures about the law in Cuba, and various laws. And then, you have lunch there, as in most Caribbean places, is a 2-hour-long event. And then there's another activity in the afternoon. Maybe you are touring Old Havana, or you're visiting a museum, right? But you're not getting back to your hotel until 5:30 p.m. And then maybe there's an evening activity, like going to a jazz club. So it is a very busy schedule that requires a lot of walking in the heat. So these are just things to keep in mind. And so that's a typical day, and that's what it would look like no matter when you went. To get a group together, I will let my father speak to that.
Everything Nicole says is true, but don't let her scare you away. Even old people like Linda Carter and I can survive a trip in Cuba. There are plenty of things we can do to have a full schedule that will let us enjoy our time and not be completely wiped out. For me, I think, especially for those of us in the Northeast, the best time to go to Cuba is when it's cold here. I am not, Cuba has air conditioning, but they also have blackouts because of the embargo. They often can't get enough oil, and it's hot. It was warm there when we went. Isn't that true, Linda? And we were there in March. So I think that's the best time to go. So if we're going to plan a trip, it would be a trip under a general license, and that would be I think it's called Support of the Cuban People, and we'd have to put together activities. After going there for 20 years, I have developed friends that have been really helpful in putting together schedules. And if the group is interested in that, I guess if they contact Helen, Helen will get a sense of how many folks are interested, and we can figure out what kind of things we would like to do.
And I would just add on that note, Charlie, you talked about the first time you went and recognizing your Americanism. And when you talk to the gentleman who talked about, will the United States be? And so, when you go to Cuba, you got to realize you're in another culture. I mean, you don't necessarily, a lot of times we go touring to places and we end up living like Americans in other cultures, right? But that's not necessarily the same. You really, I think, and Charlie could speak to this because they have to get ready to go, is you have to kind of set aside the Americanism for a second. I think it was easy for me because I haven't, like, I'm not totally invested. Helen hates when I say that, but go ahead.
What do you mean set aside the American?
Well, for me, my position is that Black folks are the only people who got to work to be American. And I don't think I should have to work to be American. Americans don't work to be American, right? So when I went to Cuba, I mean, in terms of the toilet paper and the beans, because Nicole and I, like, we're not big meat. She's not a meat person at all, and I'm not a big meat person. So in terms of the food, to kind of, adjust the fact that they don't have the resources, you don't have the conveniences all the time that you have here, that they're going to be blackouts and probably even more. And how do you get all upset about it, or do you, like, just go with the flow? Because
there's this thing called the ugly American, and you just have to leave that ugly person at home. Look, before they go, I wanted Lola. Lola, you had a question real quick, please?
Yes. I just want to, first of all, thank you so much for this very informative presentation. Really enjoyed it. The one thing I see is the similarity between Haiti and Cuba. Is it me, or is it just because it just seems that America gets involved with these countries for the same reasons, and they just make sure these countries don't make it, pretty much. And I just want to put it out there and ask you if I'm right on this one.
Absolutely. I mentioned the 1791 enslaved people's revolution in Haiti. And, it's very clear that Haiti has been punished for that ever since, right?
Okay.
Punished. And Cuba too. Cuba is punished for showing that there can be a different way, right? There's a different way of living, right? And that is not capitalism. And it's not individualistic. We can take care of each other. It's from a real place of love and unity. So absolutely. These are island being
Thank
punished.
you for that. That's just what I wanted to confirm, that I'm not crazy.
Yeah. Well, listen, I know they have to go.
Yeah, we got to let them go, but I'm going to ask, there's people on the call who have been to Cuba before. If you could just stay with us, we can talk a little bit more about Cuba. Mickey, I especially want to hear about your time being there giving birth. I don't know what year that was. I'm guessing the 60s. I'm guessing, I might be aging you, I don't know. Maybe it was the 70s. But I say Sheridan is here, Michelle is here, William Marshall is here, a few other people. So if you all could just hang around, we can talk a little bit more about Cuba. So go ahead, Linda, wrap it up. And thank you, Charles and Nicole. I look so forward to meeting you.
Yeah, in person.
Thank you.
There'll be opportunities. So thank you, Professor Affuant, my spirited brother, and Nicole, my adopted daughter I'm taking from her father. But anyway, thank you guys. Have a good day. Enjoy, okay?
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you for exchanging with us.
All
righty.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'm going to bring, did Mickey leave us? No, I'm going to bring Mickey on screen. Mickey, what year was it that you were there?
I was there in the very last couple of years of the 60s and early 70s.
In the early 70s?
Yeah, I was a military wife in Guantanamo Bay. And that was an interesting time. We had a policy then. It's the strangest thing I'd ever heard. I was very young, early 20s, just turned 21, I think, and didn't know much about anything. But the thing that intrigued me was that we seemed to have a policy that allowed Cubans to come across the fence from Cuba into the base in Guantanamo. If you can get across safely, then you could stay. They give you a car, a house, a job, everything. But there was also in place a policy that if you were trying to cross the fence, they had the right to shoot you. Americans could shoot you. Now, if you lived through it and made it, then okay, they would give you everything under the sun. But they had to put up this facade of we're going to keep you from coming across, so take that for what it's worth. And there were lots of people who did make it across. I was a brand new young singer then, and one of the first things I did there as a new wife was pull together a little band. They were all Cubans. I was the only other thing. There were Black and white Cubans. So there was quite a culture of people who had made it, and my daughter was born there then. So I was not having her on the other side of the fence. I was having her on the naval base. And it was just such a very interesting experience to be that close to another culture and to get these constant reports of what it was like there and stuff from the people who came over, who came across. But the differences in what we said we were about as a country and what we were actually doing were absolutely opposite. There couldn't have been more opposite. And it was an open secret. All of the alcohol, American alcohol that was trotted across toward Cuba, and all of the different services and things out of Cuba that were trotted across to us. Couldn't have been more open. But now on paper, it was a whole other thing. And I also wanted to interject that years later, when I was in my 40s and moved back from New York to Florida, where my home was, I became affiliated with IFA. And one of the first things they said to me, one of the first things when they heard that I had been in Cuba, they says, well, because I was surprised they liked Castro so much. I've been told so many other things about him, which was bull. But come to find out, he was in IFA. That blew my mind. So I'm still trying to.
Makes a lot of sense.
I was shocked. So to hear what you all were saying here today about him having this affiliation with his ancestry and being very aware of his Black ancestry and being very simpatico with African Black causes, few things clicked into place.
I just want to add a couple of historical things that we didn't talk about, and then we'll go on. One is that people don't know that Fidel started out with 82 people.
Yeah.
And it was 15 that survived. The revolution was primarily in terms of him and the people. 15 people took over country, but they could only do it because the people were invested in him.
Yes.
And he was very clear. It would not have happened. And some of you might remember when Angela Davis was fleeing the FBI and how people in Oakland hid her. And that's the same thing they did with Fidel. And I think, people don't realize 15 people against the United States and all we have. And like you said, when Guantanamo there, the other part is when Castro died, in his will, he doesn't want to be commodified. And he made a point, when you go there, you don't see any statues of him. And when we went, and I remember people were like, well, where's Castro? You expecting to see him because he's so revered. But in his will, he made it so that people wouldn't concentrate on him. They would concentrate on the people. So even in death, he thought about how we keep this with the people, and whatever he could do, he would do. And I thought that was important to let people know. But the whole concept, when I went, there was a woman who had young people come into her house. It was her daughter, and her husband and her daughter. And they had people like back in the day, people in the projects, people just come to your house, but they came to your house because they were learning environmental stuff. And then there were professors from the college that came in free time just to teach them about the environment. Most of their food, almost all their food, because they don't have the fuel, is organic, right? And there's some things they want to do, but they need help from other countries in terms of solar. They want to get off of fuel totally because the challenge. So they want to do solar. But like you said, if other people want to help them, you're going to get punished. And I think maybe about right after we came back, there was a major case where a Swiss bank, like you can't even get a check cashed outside the United States. A major Swiss bank has to pay millions of dollars. I don't know what they did. And this happened right before we left. I need to find that out. So I just wanted to say the literacy in the United States today, and I know the average reading in Newark is 3rd grade, but you have a literacy rate in the country. The other part somebody mentioned, I think Nicole said, the United States does not want people to see another way. And it's only 90 miles away. We don't want people to know that capitalism, matter of fact, for Black folks, a lot of people don't realize communal, collective, that's our culture.
Yes.
Right? That's our culture. Capitalism is
what
not
they
our culture.
don't want us to know.
Capitalism, hold on.
Eradicated that.
Ms. Bay, capitalism is only 400 years old. It would not exist but for chattel slavery. It would not exist because you had to have people that you considered cargo, property, items, things, in order for you to build this system. So people need to be mindful. It's only 400 years old, but it would not exist. But when you talk about communal and collective, people talk about communism and socialism in terms of government systems. But when you look at us, we're a social relation people. So we have to extract all the things they say to discourage us and divert our attention and realize that what the people of Cuba are living is foundational. And that's why Castro was there. I think that's one of the reasons he say, well, I'm out of here. I stepped out. I'm not here. But the culture is a Black culture of collectivism. Even with the things that are happening, they still retain that collective attitude, that communal attitude, which is foundational to our DNA. I'm finished.
Okay.
Yeah, but
wait, Lola. So we have two other people on screen with us, William Marshall and Sheridan Kingsbury. William has an organization, and he too takes trips to Cuba, and Sheridan has traveled with him. So I wanted them to share with us a little bit about what has been their experience going there, and when is the last time that you were both there. So whichever one of you wants to go first is fine.
I'll jump in really quickly. Good afternoon and continued blessings to everyone. My name is William Marshall. I run a travel organization called Educational Standards, and I travel to Cuba roughly 5 to 6 times per year. The last time I was there was in February. I'll be there again at the end of May. I've had a great time in Cuba, and to try to address some of the questions that came up with regard to how do they receive African Americans, it's been one of the thrills of my life. It's one of the places where I really feel welcomed. I can kind of take off my armor and I can feel like I'm a human being, and I can connect to that other human being, and no matter who I'm talking to, they are really in touch with their Blackness. And one of the highlights of one of my trips is to make sure you go to this place when you arrive on the island. It's called Casa de Africanos. And this is a museum and school where Fidel Castro has mandated that every Cuban child learn about their African roots 2 to 3 days a week. It's a great experience. I've been very, very fortunate to make deep connections. Every time we go, we bring items to be of service to the local community and the many families and people that we have connected to, and they are communal. If we bring 5 suitcases worth of goods to one household, they will package it up and walk it through their community and share with everyone in that particular community. With regard to how to get there, it's very easy. And there's a misnomer that it's hard for us to get there because when Trump banned cruise ships from going, he banned a popular travel visa called People to People. The support for Cuban people, general proviso that the professor talked about, is the easiest way to go. And all it postulates is that you're going to stay in Airbnbs and or you're going to utilize Cuban individuals as your guides, as your cooks, as your vendors. And with that as the general travel standard, you can go to the beach. You don't have to have a super rigorous itinerary. I'm there at least 6 times a year, 10 on a good year. And I know you've heard a lot, so I'm eager to answer any questions. And also, I definitely want to concede some time so Dr. Sheridan can give her reflections. And thank you.
Hi, I'm Sheridan. And so I've traveled twice to Cuba, and we're planning a trip to go again this year. I took my family and friends in 2018. My husband is here. He is an artist and got caught up in the art community there. And I took my students study abroad there for a week. It was an intense study abroad program, and we studied the healthcare system of Cuba before we went, and then we went to Cuba to graduate and undergraduate social work students there in 2019, in March of 2019. So we've had a really great experience. We stayed in hotels, we stayed in homes, we stayed in what else? Yeah, I can't remember, but we had a really good time. I think about 15 or 16 students went with me, and three faculty members from Delaware State University where I worked at the time. So we have, and people, I got a call this morning, when are we going back to Cuba? So people always want to go to Cuba, and we're trying to get there before. Hopefully we don't have to worry about Trump winning, but we are worried about Trump winning. And so we want to get there before anything happens. So we are planning a trip there too.
And I was in Cuba. I went to Cuba in 1978 and actually stayed for more than a month. And I got sick while I was there. And hospitals are great. They treated me. I didn't speak Spanish, but I'm in the hospital and treated me very, very well. And, got free treatment, no cost. So I had a lovely time then, and a couple of times more that I've been there. Love Cuba.
Yeah, we fell in love when we going back.
Very good. Yeah, we've been talking about putting a trip together and it just hasn't happened, but we're definitely going to go when Black Women Gather, just so you ladies know, we're going to go before November. And I'm actually
hospital story also. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Miss Cox. You were there for a long
I was just saying, I have a hospital story also.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the times that I was in Havana,
tell them you were there 4 times, I think you said, right?
Yeah, the first time was in 2015. Okay, and the last time was like 3 years ago. Okay, so the first time I went was with a labor group, and the leader of the group was in Detroit. But those of us in the States, we met him in Cancun, Mexico. And then we flew from there. So it looked like on our passports that we were coming from Mexico, not from the United States, So then when we get to Havana, they ask us if we wanted our passport stamped or not, because they know that our country didn't allow us to be there, and that was so courteous of them, do you want your passport stamped or not? We said, oh, no, like that. And so the first week of the conference, Fidel was there, and it was an international labor conference, So the first week, we went to labor meetings and, with the tobacco companies and other, other labor groups. We went to their meetings. And then also during that second week, we visited cultural institutions and schools, and just finding out how much that they give to their children. It was just amazing. And so the third and fourth time that I was there, we went legally. Our group leader had a license and was with educational permit. So we were able to see more. But the first time that I was there, in that second week, when we visited different places in Havana, I became friendly with one of the Cuban women there who was part of one of the labor groups, and we went to the beach. And she said to me, she says, when before Fidel, before the revolution, she said, people your color and my color were not allowed on the beaches, just like back here during Jim Crow. And we weren't allowed to stay in hospitals or anything like that. I mean, in hotels or anything like that. And she said, and that was during Batista's regime, right? So, which was promoted by the United States, of course, his regime. And they're very aware of the racial discrimination here in this country. And they asked me a lot of questions about how this country treats their Black citizens, so they're aware of it. So there was a Black woman in another group. They were like, we were having dinner together and whatever. And they were staying at the hotel down the block, just, walking distance. And we were at a different hotel, and we were at a labor hotel. And then we got, we had a little party, separation party, because they were going somewhere else. and our group was coming back to the States here. So we got word that she had gotten very, very ill, and she had like stroke-like conditions after we finished dancing and partying, whatever. So they called an ambulance. The ambulance took her to the hospital. It turned out that she did have a minor stroke. They treated her, and when she was ready for discharge, they gave her all the medical reports that they had so she could bring them back to her doctor in California. They found a home of a Cuban woman that she could stay with while she was waiting for her daughter from California to come and get her. She worked out of the hospital with zero in terms of how much the cost was, zero. They didn't charge her a penny, and knowing that the United States doesn't approve of them, has been treated them so harshly, but they gave our, the person needed medical care. She was in the hospital, and they treated her and didn't charge her a penny. And her daughter, when she got there from California, was so grateful, and I said, that's what Cubans do, I mean, we have Cuban doctors all over the world, she wasn't aware of that either, so that's what I wanted to say about the hospitalizations there. And the Cuban people were so friendly to us, and knowing how this country treats us, but they knew that we didn't stand for what our country stands for, and we didn't agree with the treatment that our country was giving them. So I would so recommend that everybody, when you get a chance, you got to go to Cuba. And when I went to Santiago de Cuba, it was they have they upheld so much of the African tradition, and Linda must know about that as well. They just yeah.
That was my experience. I put in the chats too. It was the same in Colombia and Bahia,
Oh yeah.
Brazil. Very, very strong African influence. It's wonderful. And a little bit in Panama, but Colombia was just amazing to me. I have not yet been to Cuba, but I will. We lost Miss Bell. Miss Bell had a question, but we have with us Blue Phoenix, who was born in Cuba. She says she hasn't been back since. Hi, Blue. Blue, you're muted. This is Mickey's daughter. You see on the screen Mickey Lowe. This is her daughter, and she was born on the military base. You said, right, Mickey? Mickey, you're on mute.
Hi, sorry about that. This is Blue,
Okay.
which everyone
Hi,
calls
Blue.
me Phoenix.
Okay, Phoenix, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I
So
didn't
you were
expect to be
born there, but you've
speaking.
never been back. Have you not been interested in going back, or just what? I mean, how old were you? How old do you? Well, your mom might know better. How old you were when you left Cuba? You were born there, but how long were you there? You can come.
That's a funny story. I don't know if she wants to tell it or shall I? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let me fix it and make it a little bit better.
We hear you fine.
Okay. The irony is I was born the same year the Iron Curtain came down. So since she was there because she was married to a military man, they leave on the ship. So everyone had to get out like post haste. And she had to find her own way off the island. And so what she had to do was, after witnessing people running to the base, the sirens going and they're closing the gates, what she did was, the story goes, she kept me up all night. I had just been born. I was I think maybe about 8 months old or less. I was very small, and she had to keep me up all night so that I would sleep long and hard. And she put me into a suitcase with blankets and so forth, wrapped me up, put me in a suitcase, and just carried me on the plane like luggage. And then once the plane was in the air, they weren't going to turn back around. And she took me out and fed me. And and then she said the flight attendants were very kind and they understood the situation and helped her. But I had to sneak back into my own country. And so that's the story that I was told.
Is that the story, Miss
So going
Mickey?
back is something I'm
Oh,
interested in.
there is so much more. It was the time of when they were speaking earlier about how much Black people or people in Cuba especially knew how to support each other and get along, to go along to get along, and they each helped each other through. And that's some of the first of that I was aware of. And so I learned more about that when I got into IFA, because that's the way the African stuff is, I have and you have. So that time was really fraught with so many other issues. And I was just happy to get back. We had to get back in a hurry. My mother had just been diagnosed with a brain tumor. So it was, really, there was a lot going on, shall we say. And no, we have neither of us been back since. I'd love to go back. I'd love to see it.
You'll have to plan to travel with us, Phoenix, when we go. Your mother is in England, so you have a British passport and an American passport.
No, it's just
Mickey.
American. It's American because she was on the base since we were actually living on the base.
No, I'm saying now, currently, in terms of your ability to travel to England, to Cuba.
Yeah, you have American passport.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, she was asking you, Mom.
Oh, mine is American. Yeah. Mine is American. I have to get it reissued because I left and went to live in England, and then from there to Greece for 11 years, and now back here. So, yeah.
So, Blue, Miss Phoenix, you said you had another question. What was your question that you had? And then Miss Bell has a question too. But go ahead, Phoenix.
I was just curious. I had recently seen footage of the process in general of trying to get groceries in Cuba, and they showed long lines and certain things that were outdated, certain food items that were outdated. And I know that there's also the concept of propaganda. Not all footage is correct. So I was wondering, for those of you who have been there, is that true that the grocery stores, sometimes are either closed or have long lines?
My experience when I was there is that we saw a lot of vendors with food. And as I said, the food was organic, but because of inflation, it is very high. I don't know how the restaurants there. It was a restaurant that was Lebanese that was there and had really good food. But to answer your question, my limited experience was we saw a lot of vendors with it reminded me people bringing food up from the South in Newark, and they would just, have all this food. But we saw it, but I understand the cost is really, really high. And again, they don't have, based on what I learned, they don't have enough food to feed their people. That's why they've gone to United Nations, because they can't produce the food, because they don't have the ability to, I guess you need fuel to some point. I don't know enough about that to really speak to it, but for purposes of fertilizer, right, they have a hard time around this, having the fertilizer to grow the food. That was my experience.
William, can you address that at all? Grocery shopping there?
Sure. Yes, ma'am. So I'm gonna say post-COVID, it has changed, and so what you're seeing online is 100% real. During COVID, the island began to starve because everybody kind of got insular, and a lot of their traditional lanes kind of froze up. So now, when I went back the last 2 to 3 years, the professor had it right. Those individuals who have family that can send them American money, they're going to those grocery stores and they're running the price up because they have U.S. tender. Plus, the island is starving, and the government literally asks the Cuban citizens for money to go and buy food. If you go there now, the restaurants stay stocked. That's not a problem because tourism is a big deal for the country. It's the number one import and export. However, the average Cuban citizen, everybody I've seen in the last year, has dropped about 15 to 20 pounds. Some of them are only eating an orange every 2 days. It's rough.
And the other thing too, I forgot to say, there are about 10,000 private businesses on Cuba. It's more similar to China in the sense that the government oversees it. Like in China, the government oversees their business part, unlike here where the private sector dictates. And so Cuba is a little bit like that, but they do have, so you do have the restaurants, as William said, you do have restaurants, but in terms of how they're getting their food, I didn't get a chance to really find that out, William, because they're getting food. They may have hookups with the US for food, because remember, they're private and the US wants to give this impression. So go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yeah, they have two lanes. One is they're communists, so they have a government card and they can go and get rations. And so that line is ridiculously long, and it is also like it's depleted. Then you have what's called dollar stores that popped up. These are stores that are literally taking US dollars because it's the strongest currency going to allow them to be able to trade and get what they need. Those lines are ridiculously long as well. So one of the great things about what you said with them having 10,000 different businesses, they have regulated businesses. But when President Obama got there, 2015, 2016, what he did was initiated with the government Cuban entrepreneurship, which is why we can go under the support for Cuban people. Some people are acting as impromptu tour guides. They're hosting you in their homes. And that money goes directly into the Cubans' hands. And that's why I travel there so frequently, because what we're able to pay them really sustains them and really helps out.
Wow. Miss
William,
Bell,
they
you
used to
had
have they had two different currencies when you were there. They had the pesos and they had another dollar. Do they still have that?
So they literally had three different currencies.
Yeah.
They
Okay.
had the Cuban convertible peso, which was a way for them to get on the world standard and not kind of be taken advantage of because their currency wasn't so strong. Then they had the Cuban peso. Now they have two still. And then there was the US dollar that was like a black market currency, in the euro. However, now they have the Cuban peso and they have the dollar. It's the dollar so strong now. When me and Dr. Sheridan went, the bank would give you, if you gave them 100, they give you back $25. If you went on the black market, which I always do, right or wrong, that's what I do, they would give you back 80 to every $100. Now you give them 100 US, they give you back 180 in Cuban peso. And so the dollar is very strong, and hyperinflation is a real deal.
Wow.
Miss Bell, what was your question?
Okay, go ahead.
Well, William answered a lot of my questions because I went in 2018 and I wanted to see some of the differences between from then to now. So for example, when I went in 2018, and I didn't go with the group, I just went to celebrate a birthday. It was interesting because I had to schedule through like a third party to use the credit card. And then I found a hotel in Havana. It was like a small one. And when we got there, it was like the third floor of an apartment building that had been converted to a hotel space. It was like a what we would consider like a bed and breakfast here kind of situation. But the feeling on the ground, I just want to speak to the feeling on the ground. You know, I'm a woman in my 50s. I want to go to Cuba. I went to Haiti in 2015. I've been to Ghana, so I'm going to Cuba. And I was able to figure out how to do it. We flew right out of Newark, no problem. My high school Spanish got me through. I was able to speak. And what's interesting, my bestie is brown skin. So when we would be out, when it was time to talk, they would always look at her. And she doesn't speak Spanish. And she would point to me. It was just the funniest thing that they assumed that she knew how to speak Spanish and I didn't. And I did all the things I did at home. So for instance, I would get up early in the morning, go walking. I love to see cities wake up and see what how the tenor of things are. Very organized, just never felt any, danger or anything. I felt very comfortable in Cuba. The only thing I will say, the cars don't stop at the stop sign. They look at the stop sign like it's a suggestion. It is not stop. Like, you got to watch. Because, that's the only thing I would say about walking around in Havana. And, of course, I went to Old Havana. And one of the restaurants I went to, I was speaking to one of the young men, and he was saying how his family owns a farm. And they supply their restaurant. Again, this is back in 2018. And so I went to check out the history. So of course I went to the museum, and I was so impressed at the museum. They actually use it in their classes to teach the children. I thought that was the best idea. And I was getting ideas for the future and all like that. Then I found out there was another museum in Santiago. So I hadn't planned this. I went back to my hotel, spoke to the young man who worked with us. How do we get to Santiago? we figured out a way to get to Santiago. We didn't have a lot of money. We figured out for us to get an Airbnb, right? And it was it's the first floor of somebody's home. And you know, I was like, God got me. I'm going to Santiago. What was amazing was I was going there for the museum. At the same time, there was a festival. When you go, there was a town. It was like a village town you travel through. But there was this huge church, beautiful, big church. And you talk about Santeria. When we were on the plane, there were a lot of people on the plane. It was in February. When I was at the museum in Old Havana, I saw like certain colors with the orishas. And apparently it was like a celebration of the orisha. And all along the way, you could buy the flowers and people came in to celebrate. And then I was talking to them and they said it was Cimarron. It was a Maroon community in Santiago. Enslaved people who ran. And so the museum was there. The museums there were a lot smaller than Old Havana. But even just like the feel of it, driving around all the murals. And when I was in Santiago, they mixed me up for a Cuban. And that's when they had 3 currencies because I stopped to get something to drink. It was so cheap because like it was a price for the natives. They thought, you know, they gave me the native price. And that also happened to me in Old Havana. It was like a place you could go and get lunch and, you know, and just pay. And I was like, oh, I just went with it, you know, but I was very comfortable there. So like when I went to Haiti 3 years earlier, I went with Dr. Daniels and I always, you definitely have to go with somebody. You can't just go, you know, just be an average person. But Cuba, we just went and I'm looking forward to going back.
How long did you stay? How long did you stay there, Miss Bell?
We were there for a week in February.
Okay. Let me just add, because people think that Cuba is communist. It's not a communist country. It's a socialist country. And you know, even in the United States under Franklin Roosevelt, we had some socialism here and capitalism side by side. Socialism encompasses a broader spectrum of political beliefs, but shares communism's emphasis on an equitable distribution of wealth among citizens, as well as public ownership of the means of production, though not necessarily all of them. In that sense, socialist programs and policies can exist alongside capitalism. We talked about the 10,000 businesses in a society which is less likely in a communist country. Socialists may or may not see a communist system as the end to the goal. The reason why I say that, one, because in the United States, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, unemployment, all of that are different socialist concepts that we have here. We're losing, but we have here. So it can go side by side, but both of them are about, and if you think about socialism here, it was about bringing the working class after the Great Depression, but at least making it the government, making sure that people were taken care of and not in the streets. So I just wanted to correct that because I couldn't be a political science person and not say that.
Okay.
Can I ask
Judy,
something?
Go ahead, Phoenix. Go ahead, Phoenix. And then we want to get to Judy's had her hand up for a minute. What's your question?
I apologize. Just quickly,
No,
I was wondering from listening to Miss Carter, or I don't know if it's Dr. Carter.
It doesn't matter.
It
don't matter.
I came in an hour late.
It's okay.
I was wondering, after what you stated, the first thought that I had was that it sounds like socialism can actually be coupled with many different other forms. It's basically a concept,
right?
A part of life, just taking care of people.
Right.
But when you mentioned the Great Depression, it also made me think, well, socialism seems to be accepted when it helps Caucasian people, but socialism is not accepted when it helps other cultures, you know, no matter who they are or whatever country we're talking about. That's just what it seems for this country.
No, that's a good point.
Caucasians are not the majority in other countries. So basically socialism seems to be accepted when it helps the local people who are in majority.
Interesting you say that.
Need.
Because Black people couldn't collect Social Security initially in this country. So that's why people had 20, 25 children. So they knew they're going to lose some children, but they also knew they would have children to take care of them as they get older. So yeah, that's a good point. But it's also the public concept in this country, which we're losing. This whole idea, you know, I grew up in public housing. Now they're talking about affordable. That's more connected to a capitalist system. You still want people. Public housing was to help people elevate in this, it's the inequality that they didn't have. Even though public housing was basically for people who came out of the military, because there was a housing shortage after World War II and after the Korean War. So even though Black people, at least in this neighborhood I'm familiar with, were able to take advantage of it, but it wasn't built initially for us. As a matter of fact, Rutgers Law School, unlike the CUNY system and the SUNY system and the California system of schools that were free until we started coming, and then, they changed the policy, Rutgers was designed for people coming from the military. That's why it was so inexpensive. It was never free, to my knowledge, but it was inexpensive. So when I went to law school, me and Charlie went, like, it was $750 a semester to go to school, law school, less than it costs to go to a community college now. But the whole concept of public, see, socialism brings the public. We are aware of the public. It's for the greater good, not for the individual, which is what somebody just said it. That's our culture, for the greater good. It's not about me. And interesting, just to say this, I heard this anthropologist. She was a sister. She wasn't even 40 years old. I knew it had to be Black anthropologists, but I never met one. And she said something interesting. She said, there was no violence in our community. We had no violence because until we came in communication with a different culture, right? She said, and which I knew, because she said she could look at the bones and see there was no stress. Unlike when you look at the bones of people under New Jersey PAC and in New York, where they had found the remains of children, the stress in their bones, you could tell that their muscles had fallen off, 3 and 4 year olds, because they worked so hard, right? And she talked about, one, not being violence, two, from the concept of we. You cannot survive if it's just about me. You have to have a broader perspective. And that's what Cuba reminded. It's like, even with whatever things are going on, it's still the we is ingrained in their culture, and the Africanness is ingrained in it. So you were spot on. In terms of
let's get to Judy's question, and then Dion was just there for the jazz festival.
Hey,
Dion. And he can talk to us about that. But Judy, what's your question first?
So just a quick question.
And I also want to talk to Sheridan. I'm going to say Sheridan's husband about his artwork there. But go ahead, Judy.
Yeah, so for any of the people who have been there, I think I heard somebody say that you needed to make sure you had enough money, because once you were there, you couldn't access anymore. So what are we thinking of as enough money for, let's say, a week?
I brought like $300 and I came back. Well, I'll go gambling and come back with the same money. So I might not be such a good example, but
William, can you answer that question since you go in this capacity a lot?
Yeah. So it's depending on the package you select, and generally your package should always have breakfast included. Once that's included, I would say $100 a day will put you exactly where you want to be. What might bring your budget up a little bit is when you see some of the amazing artwork, and or if you just really want to bless a family or two. But $100 a day is more than enough.
More than enough.
Back with money.
Definitely would want to bless a family.
We were
and
there
don't leave, because I want to talk about that some more. But since we're talking about artwork, Stephen, can you talk to us about you said you were there doing art? You're an artist?
I'm an artist, but I was there not doing art. I went there with a university in '78 and later with Marshall a couple of times. But the artwork, the quality of the work is extraordinary. The way I understand it from some of the artists that I talk to, it's a socialist country, and if you're a young person, you have an opportunity to go to one of 3 art schools on the island, and they are fabulous training grounds for artists. So when I looked at his work, it's just wonderful. I was trying to figure out a way to import his work over here. And but I bought a lot of work while I was there, and it is fabulous artwork. The market, Marshall, that we went to, that I bought a lot of the work. I don't remember the name of it, but I'm certain that you do.
And I bought some really good one in Trinidad as well. Trinidad has some really fabulous art.
William, did you go to the market? I went to the market in Cuba.
It's beautiful. I recommend it.
The market.
What's the name of it?
Yes, ma'am.
Dion's sharing
some
of his artwork. And that looks like
it's called San Jose.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And if you haven't been recently to San Jose, they've requisitioned the top half of it. It's 2 floors, but Upstairs is all art now, and they have a lot more renditions and a lot more artists, including sculptures. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the piece of work here that Dion has shared with us. I'm going to assume that a lot of the artwork there has an African influence. Would that be right?
So that's the artwork that I
Absolutely.
purchased,
Yeah.
all African influence,
Oh,
and
mhm.
and you know, with Santerias, the religion, but fabulous artwork, fabulous quality to the artwork.
Yeah.
And I want to say, don't spend all the money in Havana. When you get to Trinidad, it has beautiful, beautiful art as well. So save some money.
Very good. So Dion, you were there for you're muted, Dion. You were there for the Jazz Festival in January, you said?
Yes. So hi everybody.
Hi.
I take people back and forth to Cuba as well. And it was a group of like 5 of us. So we went to the Jazz Festival from Thursday. The festival was from the 21st to the 27th. So we was there. I've been to Cuba 4 times in the last 2 years. So great place, amazing people. I think we talked one time before, Ms. Higgy. I'd go to Ghana as well. So for me, Cuba is like a great primer trip. So if you want to go to the continent, you don't want to take a long flight, you want to get immersed and you want to go into a culture that's not catered to America, I see Cuba as like an ideal place, because Cuba for me is way blacker than it appears to be. It's not like little Havana and Miami, you know, because once you get on the ground, you feel it. Like going to the San Jose market, seeing the artwork. That piece is actually from in the streets in old Havana. The guy said that was his neighbor. So he painted a picture of his neighbor. Now in January, I see everybody kind of has that. So, but the beauty in that picture too is it's on canvas, and then there's a newspaper that you can't really see it unless you zoom in, and it has Spanish writing on the background. Like, it's an amazing piece. And I have it actually framed and put up on my wall. And then I have another one. I just couldn't find it on my phone. But I've been to Havana. I went to Matanzas. I'm sure Brother Williams probably knows about that slave castle fort type thing. It kind of similar to Cape Coast and Elmina. So for me, in my tours and when I take people around, I'm trying to look at all the little breadcrumbs that's dropped all over the globe to better tell our story.
You see the newspaper he's speaking of, y'all?
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. That is so wonderful. And it's on canvas and the newspaper is underneath it? Is that what that is?
Yeah, like I don't know how the guy did it, but it was, and it only cost at the time, I think it was like I think it was $25. I just can't find the one to finish.
Great idea. Great idea.
That's beautiful. Okay, I just wanted to thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
No problem.
I'm getting senile. I don't remember us talking, but I'm sure we did.
I live in Chicago. The short, I live in Chicago, but I'm from New Jersey. Miss Beverly Wellens turned me on to you. So we talked one time, you know, whenever you open it up, when the men can come in and speak. So, but I'm from Swedesboro, New Jersey.
Oh, South Jersey. Yay, yay, yay. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know what this is telling me.
What's the name of your tour group? Do you have a tour group?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yes, I do.
She said, what's the name of
the
it?
Information. Us T&D International. I can send the information in, Miss Heggie.
Okay, sounds like a plan, because we're definitely gonna take a trip, and I don't know, my thinking is to do it like I said, before November, because I just think we got a situation about to come upon us, and we need to be ready for that, I think. So yeah, so anyway, this has been an interesting impromptu conversation. I don't even know, what are you all seeing on the screen now? Because I don't know what I did. Since I did the share, I've kind of lost whatever I was doing.
We see you.
See you.
Yes.
I
Yes.
see
Oh, just
everybody. I
me?
see everybody.
That's not,
Oh, I
that's
see
not
everyone.
good.
I see Charlotte, Mickey, Blue Phoenix. I love
Oh,
her
so it's
name.
a gallery. You're seeing the
Yeah.
gallery?
Mhm.
Oh, okay, okay. So the spotlights are gone.
Yeah.
Okay, I was trying to okay. So anyway, this was a really good conversation. I'm assuming that everybody learned something new that you didn't know about I was gonna say Brazil because Brazil is on my mind. About Cuba that you didn't know before. You definitely can plan on us going at some point. Like I said, it has to be, I don't know, William, what's your thoughts on before November? Because I'm just thinking after November, we don't know I'm disappointed that Biden hasn't done more
Mhm.
to reverse things back to where President Obama had left them. But what is your thoughts on pre-November? And Dion, you too, pre-November, post-November. What are you guys thinking?
You'll get excellent weather in November. As long as you book
Politics.
and secure, your reservations, it'll be honored. And then there'll be kind of like a grandfather period in which you'll have to complete your travel, even if they jump out with new legislation. I think November would be ideal.
I think she
What's
was
your
talking about
thoughts?
politics.
Yeah, I'm talking politics.
I don't think the politics. I don't think the politics will move quick enough to be able to interfere with a trip. We're seeing how the previous legislation.
Let me say this, William. There's something called Heritage 2025. If you haven't read it, it's 887 pages, 90 page summary. Please read that because this is the conservatives, and if Trump is in, they looking to move. They, for the most part, people are thinking the day he gets sworn in. But these people were liable to make a move the night of the election.
Yes,
that's how blatant they've been with this. So that's the only thing that concerns me. But yeah, it's something that they need to keep in mind. The other thing I just want to say is I encourage every Black person who has some resources to go. Just go. From everything that's been said here, you need to touch down. People say when they go to Africa, they want to bend down and kiss the soil. And I'm not a emotional person. I'm a passionate person. I went in the bathroom and just cried because one, just walking off the plane and looking at the people and the energy that I got so reminded me of Newark before, in the Black community before the drugs came. And we didn't talk about that, but and you've been going more, and maybe Dion, but I asked about illegal drugs, because that's something that our country does too, to put people to sleep, which is what they did during the 60s to put people in the anti-war movement, the Black Power movement, the Young Lords, the Mexicans, everybody. So I don't know if anybody knows anything about, but I haven't really heard anything about U.S. kind of getting illegal drugs in there.
So it's very tough too. A young lady that is very, very close to me over there who works in conjunction with my organization, she did 5 years for literally having a marijuana plant in her house.
No,
it was her little brother. She took the charge, taught herself English, got her sentence commuted, but it is very, very, very difficult. I even tell a lot of my younger guests that go and, there's this marijuana sensation. You got to play at your own risk because they will not play with you if they catch you with it. And more importantly, the island is so deprived that 9 times out of 10, trying to purchase over there, you're going to get an imitation or what they call a burn bag. It's not going to be the real deal. You better off putting your habit to the side, but you do not see drugs running rampant in their communities. If it's underground, and it's super underground, it's a minority, and people just won't risk it because they know they will do time.
Which is interesting because the drugs were a way for people to make money initially. It was like the lottery or, when they used to play the numbers, it was a way for people to make money, even though it was a conscious effort by the FBI and organized crime to do this. So it's interesting that it's not, that it's not more conscious effort. I guess they figure they can starve them out. And you make a good point, William. Thank you for that.
And America has been successful in getting drugs into Haiti.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
And it's more boats and planes that are able to get into Haiti than into Cuba. Our government has turned a lot of other governments away from even doing business or interacting with them on legal means. And so it's a lot more difficult to be able to get it in there.
The only 2 countries that could potentially get in there is Russia and China. And that's because of their standings. And even they, because of the list of terrorists, you know, they have to, I'm sure there's some analysis going on because of all this other global affair stuff going on, but it would still go. Like William said, still go there no matter what, just go.
Yeah.
You too, Blue Phoenix.
Definitely on my to go list.
Yeah.
So
We're going. We're going back. We're going back soon.
okay.
You know, I have
Hot.
this DVD. I've had it for a long time. It's called Cuba An African Odyssey. And I noticed when BAI does fundraising,
right, with
they're
that,
offering it at a, you know,
it makes a lot of money. Cuban, get it? Cuban African Odyssey. It talks
Cuban African Odyssey.
everything that Cuba has done, particularly for the African continent, when nobody else did anything for Africa other than pimp it.
Yep.
Lola can speak to that, right, Lola?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
And to Miss, I'm sorry, Miss Cox, is it? You said you are in IFA.
I said what?
I said you are involved with IFA.
Oh, IFCO.
Yeah.
IFCO Pastors for Peace.
You know, my last name starts with it's IFA. That's shortened to Fa.
No kidding. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. My grandfather was an IFA priest. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, hello.
How do you spell IFA? And
it's IFA, but when you see a name that starts with FA, it's the same as IFA. They just shorten the IFA to FA.
It's Caribbean, no?
No, it's Nigerian.
It's African.
Oh, Nigerian. Okay.
I'm a child of Batala.
Yeah, because you sound Caribbean.
Oh.
Yeah, but you can sound like African accent too. You're one of the African countries, right?
Mine is a mixture of so many things at this point, you know? I'm telling you.
I'm a combination of so many things. My son tells me.
Tried to figure it out and couldn't figure it. Well, I've not met an American that sounds like you. I said, but American and Greek and English.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
you know, everybody put in something into how I sound. But
yeah, we are a combination. I mean, I met a woman from the Caribbean who asked me if I was from there, and I said no, I'm Nigerian. And she kept asking, "Are you sure?"
Of course, she's sure where she's from.
I love the idea.
And then when I go to Nigeria, they think I'm from the Caribbean or America. I said, okay, I give up.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. I'm so glad that Monique joined us because I wanted her to meet you, Helen, particularly. And I'm glad for her to now have, you know, come into this where she's going to find out ways to go to see Cuba again. I'd love for her to be.
For sure. I'm surprised she's in New York and hasn't gone back. What's that about, Miss Lady?
Well, she says that she has not said anything to you, but I'm going to out her a little bit. She finished her master's and we were all excited. Thank God. I'm glad to be finished. Oh, I'm glad it's over. And I'm going no further. And I don't think she'd been back home a day before she said, you know, I kind of agreed to go for the next one. So she's working on her doctorate and she was up to her eyebrows in homework. So I'm not surprised that she joined us late because she's working to finish this last class of whatever this group of classes is. So I'm glad.
I'm glad to have gotten to meet you. And you guys everybody on here, you'll be added to my email list.
Oh, she's in good hands now, Helen. She's in good hands.
Yeah, but the emails, I mean, on my Google list, if you find that the emails are too much, just let me know. I'll gladly remove you. It's not a problem at all. Or you can remove yourself, but sometimes people say they can't. So just reach out and let me know. But it's a good way to keep
Miss
abreast of
Higgy.
what's happening. Yes?
Hey, I put in the chat Gloria Rolando. She's a filmmaker in Cuba. Wonderful lady. I met with her twice. She did a lot of documentaries, and I sent one that she did on Asada Shakur. So we actually went to her house and just spoke with her. And she's actually working on a documentary for the Buffalo Soldiers, because the Buffalo Soldiers actually came to Cuba. She was also working on it's a church in Baltimore, and it's a lot of Black nuns there, for lack of a better word. So she's a documentarian working on that. She's like 71, beautiful spirit, just beautiful content. Like, it's just like an amazing part of the trip, just to kind of sit in her space and her presence and see. So I actually included that. So for everyone, they can kind of look at, she got some things on YouTube, so you can just learn more about her as well. Gloria Rolando.
That sounds real good. Okay, that sounds good. When are you planning? Who's planning? I know William, I think he's gone, but he said he's going next month.
I'm going back August.
Oh, he's at the end
I'm
of
going
May.
August.
You're going in August? And when are you going,
August 15th.
Sheridan?
He's going in May, and I'm looking to go in August as well, either July or August. So we just got to firm that up.
It's very hot there in the summertime, though. You know?
I know,
Yeah,
but we're Caribbean and we just used to
Y'all
hot.
get
So
used to it, right?
we went to Egypt last year, and it was 118 degrees, and so in
Whoa.
Abu so we're good.
Wow. Okay.
We just put on some.
No problem.
Dion, it's one thing with the heat, but what about the mosquitoes, Dion? How bad?
They weren't bad at all. I mean, it's in August, it's very hot. I went last year in July and it was super hot, but we're renting like a hostel, and it has a pool. So I'm doing that this time. The last time I stayed at I think it's only 2 or 1 hotel that you can actually stay with. It didn't make the list when Trump said we couldn't stay at hotels, and that's the Grand Aston Resort, which they have their own pool as well, and it's right off the Malecon.
Right.
The Malecon, for anybody like you stay there. Yeah, like so many Americans stay there. So I was running into people from New Jersey, Atlanta. I mean, it was just busloads of people. So but it's more expensive and maybe not as personable as if you rent a house, because the house it sleep 16. It has like private quarters for salsa dancing and just engaging and interacting. So in my opinion, when you come in this type of trip, it would be better to be in community, so you can get the most out of it.
I have a question, Helen.
I
wanted to get some kind of idea. We discussed how much to take with you to feel comfortable with spending money. But what is the trip in terms of the tariff for going in the first place? What does it cost to make the trip so I can start saving?
I can tell you my trip, I went through because Charlie had students, and the more students we had, the less it cost. We'd have a Cuban company, as a matter of fact, a tourist company out of Union City. And the whole thing with the hotel, and we stayed at that particular hotel, Dion, airfare and everything, it was like less than $3,500. And I brought, like I said, I brought 300 and I came back because I always come back. I don't spend. But we had breakfast, lunch, and dinner included.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah, breakfast, lunch, and dinner was included. I think it was only 2 days, 2 evenings, Sunday and maybe Saturday, because we came in on a Friday. That Sunday and Saturday were the only times we were sort of on our own, but all the meals were provided. So it was less, and that was the airfare. Everything was like less than 35. And that's because I didn't have a roommate. If I had a roommate, it would have been less.
Yeah, that's a fantastic.
So like my trip, I can tell you, it's $2,150. That would be single occupancy. I don't usually include the airfare, but from Chicago round trip, it's about $500. So yeah, I would still say somewhere between 27 and 3,500 would definitely be a number. I usually don't include the airfare just because you either can fly direct from Miami or Fort Lauderdale. I fly on American, so I usually fly from Miami. But if you fly from Fort Lauderdale, you can fly Southwest or JetBlue. A lot of people have frequent flyer numbers, miles, credit cards, all these different ways to get a flight for cheaper at the dates that I have in mind. The round trip ticket for Miami was $324. So it's very inexpensive to go to Cuba for sure, and like I was saying, it's a primer trip to Africa because I'm going to Ghana in November, and the ticket to go there is like $1,500, and then people working in corporate and all that type of stuff, they don't have that much time. So it's always like, oh, hold on, I don't want to do all of that. So if you can get there and back for like $3,000, it's a win, and you will have a great experience too.
Egypt's the other fantasy.
That's good. We got a lot of thinking to do, try to work something out.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're gonna meet us there from England? Woo, woo, woo.
No, I'm gonna make sure that Monique can go.
That she
That'll
could
be a
go
nice
back home.
graduation. Nice graduation gift.
Right, Blue, so you can go back home.
Right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I've been longing
All
for.
right. So I have to thank Linda for bringing this program to our attention. She
Nice.
wants to also do one on Haiti. I don't
Right.
know when.
Let me tell you.
That's next week or the week after. I forget,
Right.
Linda.
Let me tell you, it's
So-
a young film person. He just did this piece and he's showing it around New York. And somebody put, he was actually on BAI, Miss Cox. He was on BAI for Michael Haskins had him on.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And I called Michael when I heard, because I know a lot about Haiti. I know this country wouldn't exist but for Haiti. But when he said that the United States wants to make Haiti a colony like Puerto Rico, I said, whoa, it makes sense when you, but he, I don't know how old he is, but I sense everybody's younger than me, but I sense he's maybe 30 something, maybe on a good day. So I thought it'd be interesting to bring him. So I sent Helen a piece to look at, to see which, I may not do it next week because Helen has all these other ideas, but we may do it or at some point in May, because what's happening in Haiti, and again, the United States is actually calling the shots. This whole committee is not the committee of the people. I'm looking at people who, the guy that they, kicked to the curb, he was in US, he was in a correction facility here and they let him out to become president.
Exactly.
And if you look at the geography, it makes sense for them to want to take Haiti.
Right. Unlike Nigeria.
That's what, it's about, yeah.
All right, folks. I'm going to bring us to an end. We're going to stop recording. If you want to just hang out for a few more minutes and just chat, that'll be good. But I want to wrap up the program and thank Linda for bringing it to us. Thank Dion, Sheridan, and Stephen. I think William is gone. Miss Cox, Miss Bell, all these people who have been and were able to share your experience. Miss Mickey, I'm calling Miss Phoenix, just impromptu. I love it. And that's why this group is so wonderful, because you just never know who's on the call. And it sounds like there's a lot of interest in Cuba. And Dion, I see you're talking about Ghana. That's another thing that we can look at doing. So let's talk about what we can do. The year is coming to an end. I can't believe it, but we can figure out some stuff and how we want to do it.
Yeah.
It's a year of transition.
Okay, no problem.
So, all
Linda,
right.
are
So
you
on
still
that,
there?
I'm sorry.
Is Linda still there?
Yes, she is.
Oh, okay. I thought she said that when she landed in Cuba, in the airport, she felt like kissing the ground.
Yeah. It's just a feeling that came over me. So instead, I waited till I got to the food because I had to eat.
Right.
It's like important to me. And I went to the bathroom and Nicole was in the bathroom and I said, Nicole, this is just a powerful, powerful moment for me.
Yeah.
Because it took me back. It took me back to a community I grew up with sharecroppers and people who fled the Ku Klux Klan. And looking at the cultural protections that they still have that we've lost. And we wonder why our children do the things they do.
Yeah.
You know what's funny, Linda? I think it'll probably it will probably affect me the same way.
Yeah.
Because looking at my country, Nigeria today, it's unrecognizable.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. They managed to
co-op every daggone thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I had the same feeling when I landed in Ghana. I actually got on my knees, and just put my hand on the ground, kiss my hand, not the ground. But it was just such a feeling, and when I went to Senegal with the with the oh my God, the door of no return. When I came out of the into the daylight, I was crying and I didn't even realize it. I was hearing the ancestors screaming, It's powerful.
Wow.
That is powerful. That's the beauty of traveling. And I think the beauty of traveling is, of people of African descent. It's so important for us to see that we're everywhere and that we're connected. I must say though, I've never had the kiss the ground, bring back their experience. And I've been to 7 countries in Africa, and the closest I came to it, honestly, would probably have been in Jamaica.
Okay.
And I'm not even sure what that was all about.
Yeah, Helen, I think from what I'm saying, and people might not have even understood the way I put it, that when I go back to Nigeria, it's sad for me because that's not the Nigeria I knew as a child. Because it's really transformed into something I don't recognize. And it's all about, it's a lot of capitalism, you know, in a way white people have managed to change our culture, and people don't even know what our culture is. They talk about what's currently present. And I say, that's not our culture. So if I go to a place like Cuba, it will probably affect me the same way it affected Linda. Because, yeah, it's so different. And that may be the reason you don't get that kiss the ground moment, Helen. Because
yeah, but a lot of Black Americans do. I met a guy. I think he was coming back from Senegal, and he left everything he owned. He came back with no suit. He left everything. His clothes, his watch, all he had with him was what was on his back. He said he just could not leave the country.
Yeah, you know what? The part that I understand about that is that when you're in America, you never have a moment where you don't think about your race. They don't let you.
That's right.
When you go outside America, you get that. Even in some parts of Europe.
For freedom. I mean, just you can leave this country and go to Puerto Rico, and you just being outside the country, it's just it's just a, you know, it's just a breath. You can breathe.
Yes. That's why they feel the way they feel. But in terms of culture and how the people live and you know, all of that, it's pretty much
what I would love about the Cuban people, I'm sure, is the resilience that they had, that no matter what, which I think we share with them. That's our commonality, the resilience that they have, because I always say, I don't know who the chosen people are, but in my mind, it gotta be Black folks from wherever, because no one has been through what we've been through and still managed to, you know, to be here. So I see the resiliency that they have, and I tell you, if you get to go to Bahia, Brazil, you will love it there too. They're very, I think my experience was white folks were indifferent about being there, and me and my friend, we were just like in heaven. And I would ask white people, don't you love it? Don't you love it? And they were like, it's okay. And what I realized is that they are so used to being catered to. And the people in Bahia, they were just indifferent. They were like, you know, they're used to walking into a restaurant. And this happens to us even when we're in, you know, Black countries, right? If white people walk in, they forget they waiting on you and they're running over to take care of it. Not at all. In Bahia, like you just hear like everybody else, we're gonna get to you. And I think that was hard for them to and that was just that was my position. That was just what seemed to me, that they were not comfortable with not getting that privilege. Their privilege card it had no currency over there. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
When I was on the beach in Rio, there were a lot of white people there. I think they might have been maybe European and Americans. And so the Black Brazilians were going around on the beach asking people if they'd like to have their hair braided, you know, for money. And a lot of the white people, women, chose to have their hair braided. But then I heard them when they were leaving the beach, they said, oh, we can't go back to the hotel looking like this. You know, you know, with the braids, you know, and it's the same thing. You know, they co-opt everything that we do. You know, but at the same time, you know, I could hear the shame. You know, we can't walk around with braids. You know, what would people think of us? Oh my Lord!
Wow. But then they turn around and call it the Bo Derek hairstyle.
That's what I was gonna say. Bo Derek syndrome.
Yeah, they have to feel everything, own everything.
They want to look like us, but not be us.
Exactly. And they don't want our experiences either.
Well, actually, I would say they want everything about us, like you said, Phoenix, except for us, and to act like it's been theirs all along.
Yeah.
Stop telling
Exactly.
vanity.
All right, I gotta
All
go.
right.
It's been nice meeting
Yeah.
everybody.
It's
You
been
guys
fun.
are wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop recording, which I said 5 minutes ago, and then
Yeah.
we can hang out for another minute, but we're gonna
Yeah,
call
I'm
in the
gonna
evening.
now. So Helen, thank you again for another great Sunday.
Thank
Yes,
you,
thank
love.
you.
I
And
appreciate you guys.
Linda,
Let me stop recording and I'll tell you what I'm working on next.